Welcome to Talking Events, and you join us for part two of a discussion that we're having about shaping venues and delivering events within either unusual venues or the shift that there has been in locating and sourcing an event site. Welcoming back to the podcast studio, Tom Allan from True Staging. Tom, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
Matt Blood from Twickenham. Matt, good afternoon.
Hello.
Kevin Monks from Blackout. Kevin, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
Joining us on the line once again from Mobile Promotions, Robin Carlisle. Robin, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
The studio itself has been set up within one of the fabulous hospitality suites at Twickenham Stadium. They've got superb on-site event facilities, and we should give a big thank you to them at the start of this episode for their hospitality and allowing Talking Events and Event Industry News to set up for a couple of days and record these episodes. So, moving on from part one of our discussion last week, we're looking now at the demand for something a little bit different from agencies, from organisers within venues. How often are you asked, Kevin, I'll come to you first of all, how often are you asked for something different, either from a repeat client who comes back to you and says, look, we want something different to last year, or somebody saying, I want different to that event there?
I'm not sure. They don't come to us to ask for different, but they may take us to places that are different. From the nature of the business that we do, they may take us to venues that you wouldn't immediately think would be suitable for events that they're looking at, and we have to provide the infrastructure to try and transform that. So I think you will go to more unusual places, I think, more than requiring to produce something different.
What's the process like for you once somebody said,
taking your head out of your hands?
Yeah. Once you're taken to a site for the first time, what's the process for you guys in particular to say whether or not it's feasible?
It's looking at what they're requiring to do in there, whether we're breaking down the space into different areas for them, if they're looking at maybe a keynote presentation and some hospitality facility somewhere else, whether we're just practically putting in some cloakrooms. It's a case of seeing what is in the venue. Do we need to bring in, can we rig into the venue? Do we have to install eye bolts? Are we putting ground support structures in? That's the kind of thing that we look at when we go in there, as well as the kind of practical elements of getting vehicles in. I mean, a lot of these venues, it's location. People want the places to house the amount of people they need in the locations that they want, and that's what I think also drives these particularly unusual places.
Tom, what's different for you when you're working with a client that says, I want something different? What will that different be in your particular instance?
Well, it might be augmenting what's already in the venue. So hopefully the venue is nearly what they want, because if it's not, then as was said, it's quite a big challenge to transform it entirely. So if it's almost there, then it would be, how can they use the same venue different to the last people that used it? Because obviously they're being used every week, so they don't want to look just the same as the last show, and they want to get it on brand with what they're trying to deliver in the space. So it will be augmenting what the venue's got in a new way.
And for yourself, Robin, what would your response be to a client that comes in and says, look, I want something different, and what examples have you got of that?
I think much as the guys have already mentioned, although we also see from repeat clients particularly, the demand for somewhere different, doing things like a car launch and a cathedral sort of springs to mind as one we did a while ago. That was pretty tricky, certainly getting the vehicle in and around. But also staffing. I think that's something big for us, where you can transform the ultimate experience of the delegate or the guest or the staff member, depending on what type of event it is, by the way they're managed and the way they're touched, and the whole touch and feely thing with the staff. It comes down, yes, of course, to all the technologies around us, and the guys have expressed the type of skills that they have. But I think it's also how people themselves are handled.
You mentioned a cathedral in there, and perhaps that opens up another line of questioning in terms of working in sensitive venues. There's already reaction here. Kevin, what's it like working within, well, we use cathedral as an example, but presumably you've worked in settings that are sensitive and require a certain delicacy to be had when putting infrastructure in?
I think you're respectful to all venues that you go in, but some are particular. I mean, we work a lot at Somerset House, which is obviously an old listed building, and we build the cinema screen on the front of the building, and we do the pop shows in there. So, and you have to be respectful for these places, and you also have to be respectful for the facilities, the facilities managers. There'll be a protocol to follow. So, it's more about it's not just being respect for the building, it's also respect for the people within the building.
Tom, would you go along with that?
Yeah, definitely
You've worked in
agree.
similar sort of locations in sensitive areas.
Most definitely, and taking it to another level is people's personal property, because it seems that there's a good few houses in London that are now being rented out for events. So you've then got the owner wandering around, and they're going to be very precious about everything. And of course, you give everything the respect it deserves, but it does. If someone wants a floor-to-ceiling wall put up, it does throw up some problems as to how can you fix that in a Georgian townhouse.
And people have to that if you let that many people in building construction like that, there will be some wear and tear. And people have to accept that, and that's what can become difficult.
You go from 2 people living in a house to 100 people visiting it in one night. It's gonna show some scuffs, isn't it?
Is it driven by financials? Is it driven by the revenue that can be made within those venues that they're willing to accept that sort of compromise?
Yeah, I mean, there is a good revenue stream. The event space, particularly in London, there's lots of them popping up, and a lot of times people are prepared to accept the revenue more than they're prepared to accept the wear and tear of the place.
Absolutely. I'm interested now. From a marketing point of view, Matt, we've talked about what different is to these guys. You will have repeat clients, but you'll also have guys coming to you for the first time, and they're coming to you for the first time perhaps because they want that different element there. But as ultimately a sporting venue and something that is synonymous with high-level sport, how difficult is it to market somewhere like Twickenham and actually get across a message to people that there are event spaces here and it's not just a sporting stadium?
That end part of the question is actually quite difficult in targeting. I suppose in targeting new business, if they're not already aware, then it's making sure for me to identify who those likely targets are most likely to come here. But in terms of after something new, once they're here, and how we can then, I suppose, case study to go out and attract new business, we're in the lucky position really that. The RFU in Twickenham Stadium, it's an international stadium, but it's not one thing. I think it's the idea around competitiveness, whether it's again back to the core values, which I think I mentioned in a previous conversation, where it's teamwork, respect, discipline, sportsmanship, etc. It's an idea, and they can work around it and come up with something which isn't just pigeonholed again into a sporting related event because it's a sporting venue. It can be something completely different, and again it kind of comes back to the creative teams to help us deliver that. In terms of marketing to that, whether it's again case studying is a massive part of that, and it's really thankful that we've had some great events where they've used the venue to its absolute capacity. An example again is one which
we're having some system checks done here.
I think so. But it's using the venue to capacity, which we can then take out and use it just as an example, even as a springboard for other events, to say you're not tied to doing one thing here. This is a small scale shot of what you can actually achieve here, and then really it's just basing the ideas around the other parts of those values, and can we resonate other messages? Then yes, we can. It's not one thing. We wouldn't be pigeonholed into being that sporting venue, and events there because it is a sports venue.
We touched in the first conversation that we had on this subject about working alongside and with other suppliers, and there was an inference towards taking the advice and the expertise from the suppliers that are coming in and helping a venue like Twickenham. But Robin, Tom and Kevin, how are we better now as an industry and as suppliers in working with other suppliers to not just source business, but to develop our ideas when it comes to transforming venues?
For me, absolutely, 100%. I think as an industry, events came of age quite some time ago. I'm not sure of the stats. Media guys like yourself may know, but I think we're pushing hard into what's been traditional or for a guy my age, what I've seen as traditional greater spend in above the line, that spend's, I think, fallen back, and a lot of it is tipped into events. And it's a recognition of the strength of brands being able to touch people and people being able to interact with people. And for me, that's another driver of budgets, the intrigue in events and venues as well.
Tom, are you better as a company at working with other suppliers and taking their expertise on board?
I think so. Yeah, I think the DWG is just the holy grail of our industry at the moment, and just by flicking drawings around, you can communicate so much. If they're 3D, you can communicate even more. So from that visual that comes from the client, which again is a drawing, we can then, Kevin and I or similar contractors, talk about how we're going to develop and deliver what they're looking at in a visualization sense, and how that's actually going to go together.
And I think the use of the DWG is any AutoCAD format has improved massively. I mean, I remember kind of when AutoCAD first appeared, you'd be turning up to jobs and there'd be 4 different drawings, because there'd be 4 different companies that had all drawn their bit, and they'd all have different dimensions, and there'd be this kind of, well, that's my drawing. Why is your drawing different? Whereas I think the discipline in that has improved now, because I think people have been in that situation too many times before that it doesn't tend to happen these days.
Maybe latched on to technologies like the cloud, where you can just store drawings.
Yeah.
Everyone can draw on it from one source, and you've got the master that you all are looking to.
Yeah, that's also. But I mean, as good as it is, it can also be very difficult as well when you kind of do, especially with things on Dropbox. I mean, you suddenly go back to them a week later and think, this is all different. When did that change?
A blessing
Yes, we've all seen that.
A blessing and a curse then. That
but
we
like I
can
said,
share this information.
But I think the discipline is getting better, so people are now aware of it, and people don't. People tend to cross-reference and tend to speak to people, and or also like everyone's ability with the software has got better as well.
I think venues are keeping up with it as well, aren't they? With the DWG and actually being able to supply the DWG at an early stage, and then you're starting with an accurate drawing.
It wasn't many years ago you could barely get a DWG for most venues in London.
And I was about to ask a question, if you don't mind. It's from a venue perspective. I mean, what is the future for that? What helps you in that early process, and what's the next step? Because I mean, ultimately, that's what convinces the top end clients that the event's going to work here, and we need to make sure that is a painful process.
Yeah.
On the subject of being able to deliver really sort of good visualizations and references even before the event's taken place, what would suppliers need, or what do suppliers need from the venues themselves in order to be able to deliver that in the first instance, in terms of schematics, layouts, anything that's in-house? What could venues do to improve what they're giving you in the first instance to be able to then deliver those?
The best quality AutoCAD file they've got.
Yeah, with all the points on it. And
with all the references checked and double-checked.
And where would a venue go to source that if they didn't know where to get
a lot of them exist. I mean, there's companies go around that specialists will survey venues, but I mean, it normally gets discovered through trial and error. People will turn up and say this is slightly different, and I think in the past people have been reluctant to do that, because then it puts the emphasis on the event organizer to make sure they've got the dimensions correct. But I think now most, especially with venues being modernised, the actual architect's drawings exist now, so there's just that's the key to it, is getting the drawing correct.
And is that more or less difficult going back to some of these older or more sensitive venues? Is it very much a simple case that if it's a newer building, you're going to have all that stuff available? If it's an older building, you have to manually source it and put it all together? Yeah, you can do. You can go in there and, we'll go in and do site surveys ourselves. There's, like I say, there's specialist companies that will go in and do it. So it's an easy process to do, but it is a key process. It has to be done right at the start. If it's not done right at the start, it can cause lots of problems. I've been involved in jobs with American clients that have struggled with scaling, struggled with feet and inches to meters, and they've turned up with a third more of the venue than they require because they didn't get the scaling right in their drawing. Robin, I sense that you are a man of experience within this industry. What are your sort of experiences and views on how the information that is provided by venues and by locations in the first instance has helped the work that you guys do? You've presumably seen quite a dramatic shift in that in your career.
Well, I think number one, as the guys have said, accuracy of information is absolutely paramount, and it's shocking how much of that is not respected by some locations. And at the same time, I think availability of the venue for site survey and site inspection, very often that has to be done quite quickly, because we're all pushed to get the budget together quite quickly very often, to get the designs drawn up and hacked around before they're submitted. So, time is short for us all, and it shocks my team here sometimes how difficult it is to get a venue to even accept a site survey meeting in some cases. It's two areas that are absolutely 100% key to everything.
I'm keen to give everybody here a chance to I suppose give themselves a little bit of a plug, and so I'm going to come to each of you individually, and if you've got an example of something recent that you've done, or a really good case study of an event that you think, look, we're really proud of what we did there. There were some challenges, there were things that we were creative with, and things that we really helped to deliver to transform that space. Where shall we start with this one? Kevin, happy to take the baton with this one and give us an example.
I suppose I touched upon earlier, the work that we do at Somerset House, building the cinema screen in that courtyard, turning what is essentially a listed building courtyard into probably one of the premier outdoor cinema experiences in London. And that is we've done that for 11 years now. It's changed in the way in which we've done it. But it's a big structure that we build. It's 25 metres tall. It goes down 4 floors into the basement. It projects out into the courtyard by 15 metres, and we crane in a screen that's about 18 metres by 8 metres. So I mean, it's an incredible structure in a space that you wouldn't normally expect to do something like that in.
And you say you've been doing that for 11 years. What elements have developed or become easier to manage over that time scale? When
we first went in there, the Somerset House was in the process of being renovated. It was almost derelict when we first went in. The first year that we did it, there weren't even any floorboards in the first floor where we accessed onto the first floor portico. That then subsequently had money spent on it. The Olympics, it was used during the Olympics, which meant during that Olympic year we had to change the method in which we install the screen, which is when we went to the current plan that we have. And it has stuck because the venue now can't afford to give up the space that we require on the first floor. Right. So it's all external now. Robin,
let's go over to you now. Any examples that you would like to reference for us?
I think the one that sticks out in my mind from certainly the last 12 months is actually where our team came together to stage a sort of multiple location brand experience for a client, built around the Belgium Grand Prix. And the locations ranged from the hotel in London, the meeting point, Eurostar as our transport means, a building in Belgium which was part converted for what we wanted to do with it, but we had to lay on a number of activities and circumstances there. The F1 race itself in Belgium, and then on to a hotel in Luxembourg and back again, and even the means of transport on the road. So I think one of the things, if I may plug us a bit, we are very good at is stitching together a whole range of locations and activities and making it one holistic journey.
Excellent. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, so one of the bigger projects that I run, it ties in with the fashion weeks, and it's the biggest transformation of a space, I would say. You start from a tent, and you end up with an event space that is soft and tactile and inviting to the guest. And that's taken several forms over the years, with tiered seating and flat surfaces, depending on what the sort of style they're going for. It's interesting when you've got a big open space. It's sometimes nice on the entrance to funnel people through, so that as you come through, you can then see the grandeur of what you're then going into, or the reveal, if you like. So that's been an interesting project for us in terms of a lot of additional elements into a very plain structure. And similarly in tents, things like the Taste of London Festival, we work with a number of companies, one of which Laurent Perrier last year created a nice sort of lounge feel on a sort of terrace type structure, and then back behind that you had more of a VIP section with the tastings. So it created the two environments within the one space, really using what they had, and in a festival with the space is precious. So really used what they could get to the greatest advantage for the client.
Let's get some. If you guys have got photos of these examples that you've given us today, then get them to us, and we'll tweet them out via the Talking Events so that people can actually see about some of the events that you've referenced. Matt, I'm going to give you 2 bites of the cherry, and I think that's only fair, given the scale of the spaces that are available here and the spectrum that they could potentially cover. If someone came to you and said, look, pick two where you've taken a step back and you've gone, that's why we're here, that's why we have these spaces available.
Let's see then. One of the most satisfying, I suppose, where you're exhausting from very early on in the process to even post-event. If you use the example of one of the big 4 accountancy firms where decided to come here, made the most of the messaging around what their core messages were at the event itself. So seeing that process beforehand and the content that the videos that they've created and drawing people from in, because it's a national event, so they're drawing everybody from all their offices around the UK, to then using our main conference facilities where, again, it's more of a thank you to the creative industries who've built the sets and staging around this, but very large staging, numbers of roughly, let's say 900 on day 1 of the event, 700 on the second day, but it's a centre stage, which is an unusual idea anyway, so
in the round.
In the round's correct. So you've got to be talking about an event where the company themselves are obviously comfortable presenting with their backs to people turning. It's a very different technique to normal. You're then having individual breakouts where they're themed their own individual sets, staging in each of these areas, so the sub-brands and the ideas. So it's exciting from our point of view to see the movements, the efficiency of how we move people around the building, to then the quality of the food, how we've delivered that. Our staff in terms of changing around of rooms, but then how they've used the venue after the main day of the event. So what you have is a very business-driven messaging through the daytime of the event, where it's all very, as I say, modern conference centre led, but then they've got a 3-level club almost within our west stand. So there's theatre added to how these guests then walk back into the venue as players would enter or as royalty would enter, into a completely it is almost a 3-level club where you've got chill out areas, dance areas. It's almost a second venue, the way that they've used it to the daytime. What they also did then was sit. So day 1 of the event, they combined the second day's people. They arrived for a late for this party as well. They had almost a pitch side stage, which then utilised the large LED screens that you'd use on match days, the LED ribbons. The whole national managing partners of this business function were effectively a choir, which was led by interactive input as to what they should be singing. So it's drawing every element of what we can physically achieve really around the venue, which is then the life cycle of the event. You've seen this content delivered post-event as to what that legacy is, and really why you would choose a venue like us over a hotel brand or something like that. I mean, does that answer the first question on one of them? Is that too long, maybe?
Absolutely, no, absolutely. And so this was an accounting firm, as you said, and specific to them. Another example, something that perhaps is at the other end of the spectrum, or something totally different.
I suppose the other end of the scale for us is seeing things like exhibitions work and function properly. So there's a defence exhibition which has taken place here for the last 2 years in December time, where I say defence, it's based around drone technology, effectively, and it's proving that we can work in that world as well. So effectively, you're still giving people the taste of what the RFU and what Twickenham Stadium is, but at what is a very traditional format, which is a defence exhibition. You're coming in, talking to your clients, and we're doing it very successfully, but still being able to open up what the RFU is, and whether that's through use of speakers, through getting them into the changing rooms, tours of the museum. It adds another layer of insight as to why they're at this venue, as opposed to going to a standard brand, albeit a hotel venue.
You mentioned in your first example that the idea of that particular client actually changing and transforming halfway through their actual event.
Yeah.
Other guys in the studio and Robin on the line, examples, have we now got examples of that happening elsewhere as well, where clients are actually wanting to change a venue midway through the event itself and actually shift things? So it's not just building one particular event venue, it's shifting it midway through and transforming.
That's fairly common for lots of things, particularly in the conference side of things, when you're changing in from a keynote plenary into probably an evening gala dinner. It's quite common for what we do to get involved in those kind of things.
And I suppose in essence that could be a simple process, but are people wanting to dynamically really go quite advanced in terms of the spectrum between the daytime and the nighttime and how that changes visually?
Yeah, they can do. I mean, again, it's back to the budget word. It depends how much money they want to spend on it. I mean, but there are simple sort of techniques that we can use. We've got tracking systems that can deploy different types of drapes, that kind of thing, and it's kind of fairly standard. A lot of it's more to do with the kind of practical layout of the room, down to the catering company,
and
changing
the
layouts.
turnaround time as well.
And the turnaround
there's only
time.
so much you can do.
Yeah, I suppose
if you've got a
anything
very
is
limited
possible,
time
isn't
frame.
it, with budget, but time is perhaps the bigger constraint sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Robin, what your experience? You mentioned in the example that you gave of delivering it over a number of different sites and doing it on a mobile basis. But in terms of working in a static location, but transforming something, is that something that you guys have done?
Yes, we have quite a bit more of that going on for us over recent years, and I agree with the guys in your studio. Seeing quite a lot now of, for instance, an event being set up for say 300, 400, 500 distributors in the afternoon, then becomes a staff activity in the early evening. Same venue, same circumstances, but a transformation in many respects from one type of delivery style to another.
I'm pleased that we've got quite a broad example of examples when we're giving the guys who are our guests today the chance to talk about some of the projects that they've been involved in. As we look to wrap up the second part of this particular discussion, I'm going to come to Tom first, and then Kevin, and then Robin, and we'll finish with Matt, and find out what venues could be doing differently, a bit better to help with the supply point of view. Is there any advice that you could give to venues or to organisers looking to source venues, Tom?
Tricky one. The organisers looking to source venues, it's I mean, they do a good job. It's about, I guess it's the making sure it's the right venue for you, which is something that Matt said. Essentially, if you're looking for something, you need to make sure it's the correct place, and that you don't have to do too much to it, unless you want to start with a completely blank canvas. And from the venue side, providing the DWGs, the site visits are all really important, and that would be really helpful in old venues as well, where potentially walls are wonky and it's not so easy to know exactly how big things are going to be.
It's a difficult question, really.
It is,
isn't
yeah.
it?
It's
I think
double.
you're right with the key, with the information has to be key, but it's it all varies from venue to venue. It's a staffing thing. It's how people approach you as a supplier. There are some venues that are great, got good relationships with the people. There are other venues that maybe don't welcome you as much, I suppose. But I suppose to anyone, it's just if we're respectful to your venue, you should be respectful to us coming in.
Absolutely. Robin, any thoughts or what you'd like to see from a venue point of view, or in terms of the work that you do, stuff that you would like to see happen a little bit better?
I think firstly, from seeing what some in our industry do, I think it's a case of just stop the bus for a minute and think a bit more carefully about the brief, and if you have to push back to the client, and be bold enough to do so. And I know the guys you got there, their reputations as such, I'm sure they're doing that quite regularly. But I come back from a venue perspective to what I said earlier, that it's amazing how many venues, as you guys just touched on, make it actually quite difficult to have a meeting or even have any sort of site viewing at your convenience rather than theirs. That's pretty key, and accuracy of information. That's those two things there, as far as I'm concerned, is what it's all about.
Bringing it full circle then back to Matt at Twickenham, what are you guys doing at the moment? What's the big push, or how are you developing the venue, both from a marketing point of view and your communication with people, but also as a venue itself? Are you doing anything internally to the infrastructure, to what you're offering on site, in order to continue delivering and developing your offering?
In a bit of a state of flux, if we're honest. There are developments, starting from the marketing side. It's going all the way from, hopefully from new websites which trigger technologies to how we will present in the future. But at the moment, that's taking in other teams in the RFU, for example. So the ultimate aim will be to make it easier and more natural to present to end clients. I suppose that will also take into account creative guys and presenting to teams of what we can achieve and help them do. But in terms of our operational, then it's really just being very, very tight in terms of going from stage managing site visits, from technical site visits all the way through. Then we aim to really keep as tight as I hope we are at the moment, and feedback is generally pretty good on that. But I can understand where that view of not everybody gets it correct. It is difficult for, obviously, event coordinators and event managers to fit into their diary the number of planning meetings which might need to happen for certain size events. So it is always an ongoing, I suppose, time constraint. But we're hiring more people, the team is expanding. We aim to just keep getting more professional as we move forward, and that's whether it's technologies that we deploy, the teams, the training. We feel we're punching at the right level at the moment. The aim is to punch above our weight as we move forward and gain more and more clients. So, and again, if there's any other recommendations of what we should be doing above and beyond, but feedback at the moment is good, but we aim to keep getting better.
Fabulous. We're going to wrap up part 2 of this particular discussion and thank our guests. Tom Allan from True Staging, thank you very much for joining the podcast again.
Thanks for having me.
Matt Blood from Twickenham, thank you very much for being on the podcast and for your hospitality in having us set up here for a couple of days.
No problem.
Kevin Monks from Blackout. Kevin, thank you for joining the podcast and been on the last couple of episodes.
Pleasure.
And joining us on the line again has been Robin Carlisle from Mobile Promotions. Robin, thanks very much for your input on the episode today.
Been a pleasure, thank you.
As I said, we're going to try and get some pictures and some images from the guys here that reference and highlight the examples that they've talked about in today's episode and last week's episode, and we'll get those tweeted out via @TalkingEvents. You can watch a video of this particular episode and last week's episode via the Event Industry News YouTube channel and on eventindustrynews.co.uk. You can also subscribe via iTunes. For now, you've been listening to Talking Events.